Hello, writers everywhere. It's Jim Parsons with lesson 22 of Write That Novel Now. I think it's time for one of Jim's famous lectures. If you don't want to be lectured, I'll give you the punchline now so you can go off and make a cup of coffee. Try and be back in about 1 or 2 minutes. Punchline is you've got to practice. Okay, but let me start at the beginning. I see an awful lot of would-be writers and novice writers who say, I have a fantastic plot for a novel. I've got this great character. I'm going to write a novel. Okay, sounds reasonable, or does it? Great character is important. A great plot is important. You know where they come unstuck? On the word write. Because it doesn't matter how good your plot is, it doesn't matter how great the character is. If you don't have the skills and don't practice this wonderful gift of writing, you're not going to be any good at it. If you've got a great plot and great characters, what you have is the equivalent of a pile of lumber on a building site. It might be the best timber. Someone has to put that thing up. That's the writing aspect of a novel. And if you come to that building site with absolutely no training, no skills, or you've looked at a manual that says, take the hammer or the nail gun or whatever in your right hand and press this trigger or do that, and you've never actually tried to do it over and over again, you're not going to succeed in putting that building up. And no more will you succeed in putting a decent novel together if you don't have the skills and you don't take time to practice. Now, this free course is offering you a full variety of skills you might need, the training you might need to write a good novel. In the same way, I'm sure there are plenty of books out there on how to play golf, how to play tennis, how to improve your tennis stroke. But if you don't get out on that tennis court or golf course and actually apply yourself to learning those skills, it might as well never have been written. So the skills I'm teaching here have to be practiced, for goodness sake. So when you come up with that great plot and great novel idea, I know it's almost impossible to say don't write it until you've done a lot of other work and a lot of practice. So I'll say, when you embark on that great story that you've got, consider it practice, because probably there will be 3 or 4 great plots and great characters go by while you're learning to actually write. Put those practice novels, I won't call them failed novels. You will feel like a failure when you get halfway through or you get right through and think, oh, this is awful. You might feel like a failure, but put them in a drawer. It's practice. Later on, when you come out and pull it back out, you might think, I know what I did wrong there. I could do that a whole lot better. When you're a new writer, don't write for fame and fortune. Treat every piece of writing as a practice. I know you're itching to write what you want to write, but don't neglect the idea of just doing something, a scrap of writing for practice. Practice writing a dialogue. Take a couple of characters and write a dialogue. Put it away, file it away on a computer file somewhere in a folder, in the bottom drawer if you're writing by hand. Keep them, because one day you'll come up with a storyline that could very well use that piece of dialogue or that bit of description that you've made. End of lecture. You can come back now, come back now. We've been talking about developing skills all through this course. The skill we're currently looking at is dialogue. Yeah. Don't make the mistake of thinking that dialogue is just what your characters say to one another. It is a very real part of your novel. It's something that can be very effective if you know how to use it and what you're doing with it. So it's a skill. It's not just characters talking to one another. It is very much a real writing skill, and you need to learn it. We've looked at several elements. We've just looked at the basics of how to punctuate. But today, I just want to look more generally at dialogue and say, well, what should you be doing with it and what shouldn't you be doing it? I've called this the do's and don'ts. Dialogue occupies probably a third of the average novel. So it's an extremely important part of your writing, and hence you need good skills for writing dialogue. We've dealt with the mechanics of it, how to punctuate it and how to put it together. Now let's have a look at some of the do's and don'ts of writing dialogue. Let's be negative and start with the don'ts first. And I'll run through these very quickly and then deal with them in detail. Don't try to replicate real conversation. Now that one's a bit of a challenge because the presumption is you'd be trying to write natural sounding dialogue. We'll deal with that. Second thing is don't bore your reader with trivialities. Look at what those trivialities might be. And don't make it an info dump. I dealt with info dumps in an earlier lesson, and so I will just run over that very quickly. And the last thing is don't allow your dialogue to be purposeless. Don't waste. Let's look at them in detail. Don't try to replicate real conversation. Now, this is odd, isn't it? Because we're told you've got to write natural dialogue. You want it to sound like the real thing. But there's a difference. You have to remember that dialogue is a construct. It's not real, it's a construct. It's every bit a construct as the characters that you're constructing, the setting that you construct for your reader. Dialogue is a construct. As such, it's an idealization of conversation. It's not real conversation. Perhaps the best analogy I could give you is to say, have a look at the photo of a woman on the cover of Vogue magazine. Is she a woman? Yes, absolutely. Is she a real person? Yes, she is. Does she look natural and relaxed? Probably. But does she resemble the average woman you might see shopping in the supermarket or working in an office or in the home? If you're female, does she resemble you? And the answer is probably not a lot. So what's the difference? Okay, to prepare that photo of the cover of Vogue, that lady has had a great deal of attention, a team of people working on her hair, on her makeup, on the right choice of clothing. And one after the photos are taken with all the perfect lighting and the perfect conditions. Then it's been photoshopped to blazes. Any little flaws that might be in her skin, any zits have been removed. It's been smoothed over. There's been so many changes made. But nevertheless, she's a real person. And what I'm trying to say to you is the difference between everyday conversation and the dialogue that you are crafting is the difference between a real woman in a home or the shop or the supermarket and that model on the cover of Vogue. I hope that makes sense. Another analogy I could give you. I'm sure you've been in this position at some stage. You're out at a party or with a group of friends or meeting someone and you're having a conversation and you might be trying to put forward a contentious idea, or you might get involved in a real argument and you find yourself stumbling and stammering, not getting your point across while they're ripping all the good stuff into you. You're not the least bit witty or the least bit with it. And you go home with your tail between your legs. When you get home, you start to think, I know what I should have said. I wish I had said this. Oh, I could have said this. I could have said that. Right? So the dialogue you write in your novel is the argument that you relive at home when you figure out all the things you should have said. It's not the original. The next point was don't bore your reader with trivialities. So what are these trivialities? It can be several types of things, but one of the main traps that novice writers fall into, they think if this is to be a real conversation, when people get together, they always say, hello, Bill, how you going? I am well, thanks. Haven't seen you in a long time, John. That's right. Where have you been all this time? Oh, you know, here and there. How's Margaret? Oh, she's fine. And how's George? Oh, he's great. Okay, that might be closer to the truth about a conversation between old friends that suddenly meet one another. But does your reader need all that? Readers know conversations usually start with greetings and chit-chat. You don't need to show them all that. Right? Just cut to the chase. Get to the main event promptly. For example, Bill called me over to our adjoining fence. Been hoping to catch up with you. The other night when you were away, I saw a large black car pull in about 11 p.m. and a tall fellow walk in and peer over into your front window. Looked suspicious. Now, it's possible that when Bill called whoever this is over to the fence, he might have started off with, "Oh, saw you went out the other night. Yeah, where'd you go? Oh, so and so." Right? Don't need that. We need this piece here that advances the plot. Again, don't bore or confuse your reader by reproducing every stammer and pause and distraction. All you need is just a few hints of Hess's advice. For example, when I'm preparing these videos, if you could see the video or if you could hear the video before I edit it, you would find that, I'm pausing here and there, sometimes a little longer than I want. Okay. Now I tidy those bits up, or I tidy that last bit up. I want you to hear it. And it wasn't exaggerated. But so what you're seeing is an edited video that removes all the ums and ahs and the pauses from my conversation. You and I were sitting across the room from one another and I was talking about writing. I'd feel comfortable then. I'd be saying, all of those sorts of mannerisms are so natural that we do it, we ignore it in the other person. But somehow, when you're sitting up presenting video like this, you feel the need to tidy it up. And so the relationship between dialogue that you write and natural is much the same as the relationship between this video you're hearing and the original before I edit it. Just have a look at this little block of dialogue that I put up. It's someone being hesitant. And of course, when you show hesitancy, you use the 3 dots, the ellipsis, right? An ellipsis. Plural ellipses, right? So I'm using ellipses here to show pauses. And I'm also putting in all the odds and ends. Now, this might be a transcript of a real conversation that I overheard. Well, like, I'm going to need, tell me, did you ever, what, Fred? Come over here, can't hear you. Listen, Briggsy, did you ever find, stop pulling at my arm, will you, Cindy? I'm trying to talk to Briggsy. Mate, did you ever find that fake ID card? Okay, it might be normal if you overheard it, but people do distract you. People interfere with a conversation and say, break off and say something else. Darling, could you get me another cup of coffee? That sort of thing. So that sort of thing happens, but you don't need to show it in your dialogue. Have a look at this mess, right? It means people have to decipher it. Similarly, be very careful, be very cautious with dialects and accents and slang. Sure, these things are valuable. They help delineate a character. They help differentiate one character from another. It adds a little bit of interest, a little bit of spice to your writing and to your character. But just use enough. It's like salt, right? A pinch of salt, not 3 dessert spoonfuls. That's how you should handle dialect and accents and slang. Just enough. Create the character, but not so much as to make him unintelligible to the reader. Here's a line that I found somewhere on the internet that is a Scots dialect. Now, someone from Scotland might look at it and say, "Oh, mate, I'm sorry, but that's a load of nonsense. I apologise. I'm totally ignorant of the true Scots accent, and I'm not going to try to render this." Now, someone might think, okay, I've got a Scotsman speaking a very broad Scottish accent. This would be the way to do it. But it's not, because as you can see, you might have to read that 3 times to be certain of the meaning. The meaning will emerge from it when you try, but you've just broken the rules. There is an unspoken agreement between writer and reader that you will try to keep them submerged in your story. They want to be submerged. They want to be immersed in your story. And the minute they have to stop and think, oh, I'll have to read that again, suddenly, like a cork that popped to the surface, they're now aware they're reading black squiggles on a white page. They're not inside those characters' heads. They're not immersed in that world. So you've broken that very important rule, the bond between them. Here's another example of the same thing. Let's say you're writing about New York and the gang scene. Again, I've just grabbed this off the internet. It could be nonsense for all I know. But the line goes that the slang used by some New York gangs, the crab got a biscuit and is drinking the bumblebee's milk. What the heck does that mean? Well, I'm reliably informed that it means a Crip gang member has a gun and is looking to kill a Latin King rival. Now, to put that line in without any sort of translation would make it meaningless to the person who is not au fait with street gangs slang, contemporary street gangs. And to have to translate it every time you put some line like that in is awkward. It's not what reading is all about. Again, you're dragging your reader out of the story. Here they are wondering who's going to get shot or stabbed next, and then saying to them, look, just translate this line of dialogue and you'll understand it. Not what the reading experience is all about. So what do? Just find the odd word here and there that's going to give a little flavour and make it sound authentic, even if it's not totally authentic. You can go too far. The next point is don't make it an info dump. Now, I told you what an info dump was in an earlier lesson, but I'll run through it again. You have to remember that when characters speak to one another, they're meant to be communicating with one another, not trying to tell the reader something, nudge, nudge, wink, wink. So when you use characters to deliver information to your reader, it just sounds neat. Have a look at this. Well, George, you're 30 tomorrow, you know. How terrible that our mother died giving birth to you and our father has always blamed you for her death. Okay, well, if George doesn't know he's 30 tomorrow and doesn't know the circumstances of his birth and the fact that his father hates his guts, there's something wrong. It's clear, while this is a terrible piece of dialogue, it is clear that the only reason for this dialogue is to try and communicate these facts to the reader. That's not what dialogue's about. Don't do it. Here's another example where the person is commenting on herself. Oh my God, I've got to run, Mary. I'll be late getting to my work as secretary to the senior counsel at Smith & Son. Now, if you're talking to a friend that knows you well, you're not going to have to tell them what your role is and where you work. She'd be likely to say, oh my God, I've got to run, Mary. I'm going to be late for work. The rest of it is pure junk. It's there. It's an info dump because the writer is too lazy to find some other way to communicate this important fact to the reader. Don't do it. Similarly, don't allow your dialogue to be purposeless. Dialogue is so important. It can do so many different things. You've got to make use of it. Don't waste it. It shouldn't be a filler, right? It has an important function. And so if you find you're 1,000 words short of a particular chapter, don't just have a lengthy dialogue between two guys discussing a football game and then they get to the end of the chapter and say, well, I've got to go. Chapter 3. Not good. Not the way to do it. Find some other way. Again, getting back to that idea of what is trivial, like greetings. Let's say you have the parents come home from work every night and they always insist on getting the kids together and having a family meal together. Very, very laudable. Don't feel obliged to show pages of dinner table conversation just because they're actually doing. Yeah, okay. They get together over dinner and they chat about things, right? Don't do it just for the sake of it. If there's an important little thing that's going to come into it, like the teenage daughter saying, oh, and by the way, I'm pregnant. Yeah, great. That's furthering the plot. But just to say, look, they came home and they had a nice little dinner table conversation, and little Bertie was a naughty boy at the dinner table. You decide you'd like to add a few laughs to the story. It's great if your characters and their dialogue can include some wit. That livens it up and it shows your character as well. But don't just write witty or funny dialogue for the hell of it, page. Your characters are not stand-up comedians. Right? It's got to be realistic. Make sure that there's a reason for any humour that's written into your story. In short, if your dialogue does not perform one of the 6 functions I'm about to discuss, leave it out. No dialogue, it's got to perform for you. And these are the 6 functions. And of course, they're the do's that we've been talking about. Okay, each block of dialogue you write has to perform one of the following functions. It might provide dynamism and pace. There's nothing moves a story along speedily than some good dialogue. Think of this little clip. One brother rings another. His name, Bert and Ernie. I get that. Bert rings Ernie and says, I thought I'd better let you know Dad died last night. Ernie says, oh, I see. When's the funeral? How long have I got to get there? And Bert says, you're not invited. We don't want you here. And the last thing the old man said was, I don't want that son of a bitch at my graveside. 3 lines or 3 changes of dialogue there. So much said in that space of time. If you were trying to deliver that with a narrative where you explain what was going on in the family dynamics, it would take pages. But just in those 3 little clips of dialogue, there's a whole world of family relationships. So that's how dialogue can be used to really whip through some of the plot and reveal character. So a few lines of skillful dialogue can achieve more forward movement and exposition than pages of narration. You can use dialogue to create realism. We want the readers to be immersed in the story and to believe what's taking place. Dialogue is your best shot. It's difficult to fall into the trap of telling when you write dialogue. You're writing narrative, it's very easy to start telling the reader stuff rather than showing them. But you're pretty safe with dialogue unless you're delivering an info dump. You can be pretty sure that you're showing when you're using dialogue, because the scene is being played out, isn't it? Before the reader's eyes. We hear the words, the characters' voices gain immediacy, and it's hard to deny then that this is really happening. We're right there as it's happening. Dialogue will usually advance the plot. It's a very good means of advancing the plot. So there can be no dialogue just for the sake of it, or to expound fancy philosophical ideas or the author's personal hobby horses. It's not what dialogue is for. Don't do it for the sake of it, for your own benefit. Advance the plot. And because plots are made of conflict, very often that conflict occurs in the dialogue. If the dialogue is not actually advancing the plot, then it probably is there, it should be there, to define and reveal your characters. This is the way you draw your characters. One way of showing what your characters are like is to show them conversing. They'll expose their ideas, they'll expose the way they think about things in that dialogue. So that's one great way to reveal characters and to show how they rub off one another. And of course, we pick up subtleties in dialogue that the author would otherwise have had to tell us in a very blunt and telly manner. We're used to unravelling what people really mean when we're talking to them, most of us. And so when we see it in dialogue, it's much easier for us to pick things up that otherwise the reader would really have to. And dialogue usually shows some tension between characters. Not always, but usually. If not open conflict, or it will give hints of an internal conflict, even in a pleasant conversation. So we will pick up that one character is uncomfortable with another one, even though on the surface they're being pleasant and saying all the right things. So these are the ways that you can define and reveal your characters. Even when you've got a well-established character, they can develop. And dialogue is a good way to show how characters are developing within the plot. But your main characters are not static. They're not cardboard cutout. They develop and they change over the time of your novel. And it's often within dialogue that we note these subtle changes. For example, we might notice a doubt creeping in about something that was once a fixed idea. We might see a softening or a hardening of attitude. Or our character might suddenly tell a lie, an uncharacteristic piece. Something strange is going on. Or we might see the start or the decline of a romance. All of those things are developments that you can show within dialogue. And last of all, number 6, we're using dialogue to provide information and misinformation. Now, I'm not talking about info dumps, telling readers things that you shouldn't have to tell them, you should show it some other way. But characters are forever revealing things to one another, and hence the reader. Real things, important things. This information is essential to the plot development. So it becomes revelatory dialogue. One character learns crucial information from the other. It might be the colour of the getaway car that the detective finds out about. One might reveal the hiding place of the jewels, the whereabouts of a missing wife, the betrayer, the lover. We learn all these things often because one person blabbed to another. And in mystery writing, and some other genres, it's possible to misinform, for one character to misinform the other. Tell lies to mislead them, and sometimes to mislead the reader at the same time by delivering what we know, red herring. Or the character will make a false assumption based on the information he or she reads. So have a think. Every time you write a piece of dialogue, run your eye down that list of 6 points and say, does this dialogue perform one of these functions? And if not, what the heck is it doing in my story? Okay? Well, that's it for lesson 22. Thank you for watching. Come back next week when I'll still be talking about dialogue. It's such a big topic. I'll be looking at a thing called talking head syndrome and how to avoid it. Till then, please remember that if the only reason you're writing is to see if you can get published and make a fortune, you're writing for the wrong reason. Writing is a joy, should be a joy. Write because you feel compelled to. Write because you love it. Till next week, goodbye. Thank you again and keep safe.